Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to sit down and talk a little bit on knowledge, on thinking, on understanding, on learning. You know, it's a very interesting thing, but I find it an unfortunate thing that I have seen quite often, and that is that people don't wish to educate themselves after they go to school. Have you noticed that? I found it rather fascinating. How many times have we talked to individuals and saying, what have you read lately? And they say, I haven't touched a book since I got out of school. I'm sitting there going, my God, how could you do that? How could you deprive yourself of such things? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think one of the greatest things that we can do for ourselves is educate ourselves throughout our life. And perhaps one of the greatest periods of time to educate ourselves would be toward the latter part of our lives. Because you know something? The world is constantly changing. Everything is changing. Time is flying by so fast, it's incredible. And I have to say for myself, here I am in my 6th decade of life, and I have to say that, wow, the world that I knew only exists in motion pictures and recordings. It's long gone. The world of today is a very, very different place from the world in which I grew up with. It's an interesting thing if you think about it. The world in which I grew up with had more in common with 50 years before I was born than 50 years after. 50 years after I was born, the world was changed so much, but 50 years before I had been born, we had most things. Of course, it was rudimentary, of course. You had early planes, you had automobiles, you had phonographs, you had motion pictures, you had, the subways and stuff like that. That's 50 years before I was born. And when I was born, we had somewhat the same. Things had advanced quite a bit. We had improved upon the airplane. We had also, improved on the subways, the trains. Everything had been improved. But it was still the same thing. Now, 50 years after I was born, it's hard to recognize. It's really interesting how much we changed in those years. And now, as I have long since passed that time, I'm looking with wonder at the 21st century. I am indeed an individual of the 20th. I grew up in the 20th. But I embrace the 21st century and try to learn about it as much as I can and try to use many of the parts of the 21st century. And of course, this right here is perhaps one of its greatest examples, sitting there putting something online. But it's an interesting point. We should always keep learning. Teach yourself. Now, I'm not saying to everybody get a library. That's a lot of work. Believe me, it's a lot of work. And I will tell you this about the library that I have here, that the books here are getting heavier and I'm getting older. And I really don't think in time that my library will continue in the size that it is, because within the next few years I'm going to have to move. And when that happens, this will have to go the way of the dodo, sadly. But nonetheless, I'm trying to capture as much of it as I can, and learn as much of it as I can, and share as much of it as I can, while it exists. And to a degree, while I exist. That's an interesting thing if you think about it. I have learned more from people who learned many things in the past and who spoke of it, or who recorded about it, or made early films about it. Oh, I have learned so much. And it's an interesting thing. I've learned from the dead. And I am certainly hoping that this recording is available, in whatever form it might be. I have questions about that, but I hope it would be. Maybe 50 years after my death. And then I can share things that I know and knowledge that I know and experiences I've had. But I can never ever find a reason to understand why you wouldn't want to expand your mind. I can't find a reason to understand why you wouldn't want to learn something new. I cannot understand that. Yet, we have a society today that seems to be perfectly content with many aspects of that thought. People aren't into reading anymore. That's fine. You have the internet. You have all different types of things that you can use. But in many cases, the implements that you use do much of the thinking for you. And I don't find that useful at all. I want to learn, and I plan on learning. In fact, I was reminded of the statement of Thomas Edison's once. They asked him, when are you going to stop studying? He said, when they bring in the oxygen tank. Good answer. Well, I hope to be the same. I hope to keep learning and expanding my mind. Because, believe me, as you get older, it's much more of a challenge to try to keep up. And let's be honest, you can't keep up totally. But you can try to learn, you can try to conform, you can try to fit. And one of the greatest ways to do that is to constantly expand who you are. So my friends, knowledge is very important. And knowledge is ageless. And that's a very important thing. Knowledge is indeed ageless. It may be old knowledge, or it could be new. But the fact is, knowledge is knowledge. And to expand that knowledge to present or future generations is a phenomenal and wonderful goal. So folks, read a book, study, learn, talk to people. I can't encourage this more than that, but please, I think it's a very, very important thing. Please, expand your mind. Expand, learn, use that knowledge. Because that knowledge can only help us and truly future generations.